Hey, what's going on everybody? George here once again with the Vitality Guru, helping and inspiring you to live a happier, healthier and more rewarding life. So in this video, I'm going to be talking basically about spiritual awakenings and what that really means, because it's something that I believe a lot of people are going through right now and not something they may be aware of, because let's be honest, we're not a very spiritually in tune society. We're not even a very emotionally and self-in tune society, let alone anything else. Anyone who's kind of gone down a sort of mystical route, if you want to put it that way, generally fell into religion, because that's what society teaches and that's what we've been indoctrinated to understand as anything that science doesn't understand. But I think more than ever nowadays, at least, we're seeing people go through what you can only really call a spiritual experience. And I kind of want to highlight what that actually is, because believe it or not, a spiritual experience doesn't mean that you burst into a ball of energy and ascend up to the heavens or anything like that. Rather, what it means to be spiritual, to have a spiritual experience, to become more in tune with your own spirituality, is more just about becoming self-aware, and it's becoming in tune with yourself. And what I mean by that is that most of us don't know who we are, and we think we know who we are. And the fact that we only think we know, the fact that we think, it is kind of the sort of evidence that we don't know. And what I mean by that is that most of us think we know who we are. And you can go up to any person and you can ask them who they are, and they'll have a bunch of answers for you. So if you asked me who I was, I would tell you my name's George, I'm a 21-year-old male, I live in England, I make videos on YouTube, and I aim to and try and help and inspire people to live happier, healthier, more rewarding lives. That's what I do. That's my name, that's how old I am, that's where I've grown up in, that's where I am now, that's where I live, all those things. But all those things aren't who I am. They're labels that I've used to associate myself. They are just labels. There's a word that I use as my name that my parents chose for me, that was written down on my birth certificate. There's the length of time I've been alive since my birth. There's the location in which I've spent my life. But they aren't me. They're things I'm associated with. And so if you take away the labels, take away the name, take away the associations, who are you? What can you give as an answer? Now, at that point, most people will just go, well, I'm me. And then you go, well, who is me? And then they just kind of go around in a confused circle of labels and confusion. And so what that really kind of shows is that most of us aren't actually very self-aware and aren't actually very much in tune with our, what I would call our spirit, which is ultimately just us behind the labels. And for those of you that have kind of gone down this route, you'll know that the group of labels that we associate ourselves has a name in philosophy and teachings of similar sorts, and it's called the ego. And that doesn't mean it's inherently completely egotistic or arrogant or anything like that. No, what I mean by ego is I mean this identity that we think we are. And and it is just basically a mental construct. It's a repetition of subconscious thinking, subconscious beliefs that we've been programmed to believe that we are. And that simply comes down through repetition and repetition and repetition. When you think of it, how many times have you said, my name is dot dot dot. How many times have you used your job title in reference to yourself, or your marital status, or your gender, or whatever it is, your hobbies, things you enjoy, whatever it is. You've used all these things to associate yourself and label yourself, but none of which are actually you. And so to go through a spiritual experience is to start becoming aware of not so much who or what you are, but all the things that you are not. And I think one thing we really don't understand in society is that to go through the experience of learning what you are not, and to go through what you might call a spiritual experience, isn't actually the sunshine and rainbows and joy and eternal peace and enlightenment that some of us seem to just kind of assume it is. In fact, it's generally the absolute opposite. And what I mean by that is that to become aware of yourself and to become self-aware and to actually put your ego aside and to look at yourself means that you have to accept a lot of the things that you probably didn't know were there. And what I mean by that is that we all have these behaviors, these traits, these parts of ourselves, these ways of thinking that we don't want others to know exist within us. We've all got things that have happened in our past that we wish never happened. We've all done things that we wish we never done. We've all thought things that probably didn't make us feel very pleased within ourselves for thinking them. We've all said things that we really ought not to have said, and a lot of us live in huge states of denial. And we live in a state of denial most of the time because that's generally the only method we were really taught about living our life. And what I mean by that is, take a look at society. If you've got anything wrong, if you've got problems, if you've got issues, if you've got something you don't like, what do? Generally, we tend to do what we can to suppress and shove things under the rug. And what I mean by that is we use all different methods to avoid facing the problem. Now, if someone's struggling physically or mentally with their health, they'll often be told and directed towards taking medication. Not that it will fix it, but it will suppress the symptoms. If people are unhappy, they tend to go for alcohol and drugs. If people aren't feeling a sense of connection, then they tend to go for meaningless sex and cheap relationships. If people aren't happy with their jobs, then they kind of just have to shut up and deal with it. And so we have this inherent flaw in society that we just kind of like to shove everything under the rug, pretend that things aren't wrong and things will never get better, and no, it's okay, it could be worse, and all this stuff. When deep inside, we are screaming out for things to get better. And because of how much we want things to get better, and the fact that the only options we're really ever taught about aren't very helpful, most of us live in denial. And if you want to know if anyone's living in denial, just look at their quality of life. The more denial you live in, the more miserable you are, but the least you'll probably realise it because you'll become numb to the normality of it. And so to become self-aware, to go through what is known as a spiritual experience, go down a spiritual path, means to start becoming aware and accepting all of the dark, unpleasant things about yourself. And that's obviously going to be very different for different people because all of our experiences are as individual as we are. And so that's why spirituality as well is very much a personal experience, a personal journey. One person's spiritual experience will have absolutely almost nothing to do with another person's, and so on. And so I can't really explain to you what yours would be like because ultimately I don't know you. However, I do want to go into an experience that I've been through, that I've mentioned before in one of my or two of my videos, that has ultimately, or was ultimately, the absolute turning point of my life. And this experience happened when I just turned 19 years of age, and at the time I was in the absolute worst place imaginable. I had completely fallen out with all of my friends. I wasn't getting on very well with my family or my parents. I just broke up with the person I was seeing. My mental health was rapidly declining into serious psychosis. My physical health was awful. I was always feeling sick, I was always feeling ill, I was always tired, I had no energy, I had really erratic heart rates and problems with my blood pressure. I was struggling with joint pain, I was experiencing serious muscle dystrophy, I was losing lots of weight, I was struggling with drug addiction, and at the time my life felt horrendously hopeless, and I thought I felt hopeless time and time again in my past, and I did, but like with anything in life, there's always more. And one thing I like to remind myself is things can always get worse, because I've seen that happen. However, it was at this lowest point in my life where ultimately everything was failing on me. My mental health was failing on me, my body was failing on me, my friends had so-called apparently failed me because I didn't have them. I didn't feel a connection to any of my family. I didn't have a job, I didn't have any money, I was broke, I was in debt. And so everything was just awful. And what do we tend to do when things are bad? Well, we tend to blame everyone else and play the victim role. We blame our parents for how they brought us up, or they blame our ex for having lied to us, or we blame friends for having betrayed us. And yeah, all these people did awful things, and we have every right to be angry and annoyed at them and frustrated at the pain they've given us. However, unless something has happened really recently, they are not responsible, or they are never responsible anyway, but they are not responsible for how you feel today. Now, doesn't mean they're not to blame. Of course they're to blame. If people have done you wrong, if people have mistreated you, if people have abused you or neglected you or hurt you, of course they are to blame. But what are you going to do? Are you going to call them up and ask them to come and fix it? Chances are you probably don't want them to, and chances are they really wouldn't be able to, and they wouldn't anyway because they hurt you in the first place. And so there came a time where, despite the fact that at the time I had everything and everyone to blame, I could blame the people who mistreated me, I could blame the drugs, I could blame my upbringing, I could blame my crappy friends, I could blame everything other than myself. Because why would I have done this to myself? Of course I wouldn't. I'm not to be blamed. However, that doesn't mean I'm not responsible, especially for my own health, my own well-being, my own emotions, my own quality of life. They are my responsibility, because at the end of the day, no one can actually control them other than me. Now, don't get me wrong, we get people who are able to be quite emotionally manipulative, but that also comes down to a responsibility on us. If we have very good self-control and self-mastery and emotional awareness, then it's very difficult for others to play on us. And so that's why you'll often find narcissists and people who are manipulative, they do prey on the weak. And what I mean by weak is not weak, but people who haven't learned courageous strength in self-awareness or in self-control or in self-understanding, and which is where I believe a spiritual experience comes in, because unfortunately a lot of things are wrong in the world. There's a lot of nasty people out there. Life is very stressful for a lot of people in every different way you can imagine, And it's pretty fair to say that there's probably no one on the planet that is exempt from going through life's crap. And so it's not about playing the victim, it's not about being the worse off, it's not about having too much stuff to live with, because we all have stuff to live with. And yes, some people's are worse than others, and some people have gone through horrendous things and have been destroyed by it for years, and others have gone through horrendous things and been okay with it, whereas we've also had people go through minor things in someone else's eyes that's completely destroyed them. So we all go through different things, and we all go through things differently. However, going back to the experience I had when I was 19 years of age, and pretty much everything had fallen apart around me, and I ultimately thought I had nothing left, something clicked in my brain when I was so sick of suffering and so sick of absolutely chucking it down now. Nice big black cloud, yay. Okay, so we might get a bit wet. Yeah. But yeah, going back to the story, when I was 19 years of age, after just suffering for so long and being so sick of everything and being so sick of being miserable and being depressed and being paranoid and being addicted to drugs for happiness and being so tired all the time and being so ill and being so weak and lethargic and so unhappy in myself, I realised no one was coming to save me. I realised no one was going to ever undo the things they've done to me. No one was ever going to be able to come back in any meaningful way and fix anything. And so I just made the decision that ultimately I have to live with what I've got. And if that's the case, which it is, then I ought to do myself a favour and do everything I bloody can every bloody day to just make it a little bit easier on myself, a little bit better, a little bit nicer. And so something about that decision to take absolute responsibility for pretty much everything that had happened to me at the hands of other people, everything that I was going through that I felt I had no control over, everything that I was experiencing that I felt hopeless to, I decided to take absolute responsibility for. And in making that decision, I can only tell you now, from over 2.5 years on, that decision completely shifted and transformed the route of my life forever. And I do not say that lightly. I do not mean that in any lesser than I want it to really come across, because it was from that moment of making that decision that within less than a year I had gone from being kicked out of sixth form and only having college education behind me and having no job and having no money and being in debt, to studying so much and learning so much, to opening my own business with no formal education behind me down that route. And from then I decided and embarked on a whole range of incredible journeys. And what I mean by that is I went from being miserable, depressed, too paranoid to go out, addicted to drugs and having no friends, to within a year to a year and a half to 2 years, traveling around the country, giving live seminars, doing talks, doing workshops, doing classes, doing courses, working with clients, and helping so many other people understand what I understand. And if you can't tell, I am not even remotely miserable about life anymore. The fact is, regardless of what's going on, and trust me, this didn't make life magically better. Things still go on. I've not stopped facing hardship. I've not stopped having to deal with crap in life, because you never will. But what's different is the way I handle it and the way I deal with it. And you could argue that that's almost just kind of like a sense of maturity, and it is, in a way. It is a sense of growing up. It's a sense of taking responsibility, of maturity. But where it comes down to what I believe is the spiritual side of things is that to take responsibility of everything, and I mean everything that has happened to you, that will happen to you, that is happening to you. Not to say that you're to blame for it, of course you're not to blame for it, but you're responsible with what you do with it and how you go on from it and what you make of it and what meaning it is and all these things. But to become spiritual, to be spiritually aware means that we have to look at all the different things that we want to blame other people for and really own up to them. And doing so causes us to realise that all these things that we thought we actually aren't. They're just things we've attached ourselves to, that we've held on to. And what I mean by that is, when I was younger, when I was going up through my teenage years, I used to always have a lot of anger problems. I was very quick to get wound up. I was very quick to get agitated. I was very short-tempered. And I was very sort of, I was just very moody, basically. And I used to find every excuse to blame that on something else. I blamed it on anger issues. I blamed it on people I saw when I was growing up being that way. I blamed it on people who were annoying me. I blamed it on the fact that I was stressed about something and therefore I was quick to get annoyed. And so I always found a reason to put the responsibility on someone else so that I didn't have to do anything about it, so that I could wait until someone else came along and fixed it for me. However, that doesn't happen. No one came along and fixed it. And so I'd lived in denial for a long time that I was actually that person, the person with anger issues, the person who was agitated, the person who was quick to get wound up and sometimes even violent. And in having to become aware of that, in taking responsibility for things like that, you have to accept it's at the hands of your own doing. And so even if someone is winding you up, even if someone is annoying you, even if you're stressed about this and that and you're struggling to cope, I'm still the one who's responsible for the anger. I'm still responsible for the one who's raising my voice. I'm responsible for myself when I'm getting agitated and continuing to fight in a situation that I don't want to be in. And so over time we end up going through all of these things that we would rather deny about ourselves, and it could be things like anger issues, things like addiction, things like past trauma, unhealthy coping behaviours, bad decisions, insecurities, and all of these different things. And so more often than not, they are the hardest things for us to accept because they are the things we don't want to accept. They're the things we want rid of. And so we believe that the best way and the only way to get rid of them is to pretend like we don't have them, to ignore them, to shove them under the rug. But if you haven't noticed, when you do that, things stay lurking for ages, years and years and years and years, and forever if you allow them. And so what I've learned going through my experience is that when you start to take responsibility of something, when you start to take responsibility, things feel like they're about to get real bad all of a sudden, because you're about to become aware of everything you wanted to blame someone else for. And once you're aware of it, and you've already made a decision to take responsibility, there's no going back. So what I mean by that is, let's say I've decided that from today I'm going to take responsibility for everything about myself. And then I come to realise that I have a deep insecurity about socialising, for example. Well, now I can't blame anyone else for not being sociable. I can't blame other people for making me awkward or making me feel insecure, because I've got to look at myself and go, okay, well, I'm feeling insecure. Why am I feeling insecure? Have I always had these insecurities? If not, when did they start? Why did they start? If I've had them as far as I can remember, then maybe I can see where I've learnt them. Is it learnt from a sibling? Is it learnt from a parent? Is it learnt from school? Did I get bullied? Things like this. And we have to start becoming aware of ourselves. And in doing that, the little reward we get is when we become aware of something in ourselves, we actually release it. And this is basically sort of the foundation of a lot of sort of new agey kind of meditation healing, trauma healing, emotional healing kind of things. And because when you look at the sort of common paths of psychotherapy and cognitive behavioural therapy and things like that, a lot of the time acceptance isn't a major part. And what I mean by that is that we often, if you've been to therapy, you'll know this, you often talk a lot about, obviously, things that are wrong. We talk about the past, we talk about issues, we talk about our feelings, we talk about our thoughts, we talk about all the little things and all the big things. We just talk a lot, obviously, it's a spoken therapy. But especially with some issues, especially some more deeply rooted issues, they're not a thought-based problem. They're more often than not emotionally rooted. More often than not, they're emotionally rooted, and this could be anything from anxieties to insecurities to feelings of worthlessness to depression to traumas to addictions to codependency to narcissism, and all these things, most often, as well as eating disorders and like compulsive disorders and sort of social problems as well. All these things are rooted in our emotions, and as a society we're very emotionally switched off, and we know this because it causes huge problems, and we're not always very emotionally in tune. Not a lot of us seem to understand all of our own feelings, and it takes practice, it takes time, it takes a whole nother level of self-awareness, of mindfulness and practice. However, a lot of our problems today, they are rooted in our emotions, and more often than not are repressed emotions. And so part of the healing modality of them is to actually draw deep within our own selves, to go deep within ourselves, to find out those emotions and to actually feel them rather than hide from them or run from them. We've actually got to bring them out and to become aware of them and to feel into them, and in doing so we do actually release their power over us, which is where trauma healing and things like that actually come into play as being possible in ways that our current procedures in psychotherapy and the medical route of mental health haven't accepted so much yet, but I believe they are getting there. But to become self-aware means we've got to become aware of our insecurities, become aware of our emotions, become aware of our problems, become aware of our traumas if we have them, become aware of all the things we don't want to be aware of. But in doing so, it's like you finally stop running from all your demons, because let's be honest, we all try and run from them, and it's a scary chase to be in, and somehow they always catch up. However, once you actually feel into them, once you actually accept them, they suddenly just they don't vanish, but they don't scare you anymore. They don't control you. They don't influence you in any way like they used to. And so you are actually pretty much free from them, as much as you can actually imagine that to be. Probably more than you can imagine that to be. And so, why am I doing this video? Well, I actually think that more people than ever, especially this year, are going to be going through this experience of an awakening, a spiritual awakening. And what that basically is to become aware of all the things you are not. And underneath those labels, underneath those titles, underneath those things that you've assumed you are, there's got to be something underneath. And that something underneath isn't just a human body, because you're not the human body. You have a human body, you are rooted within your human body, but you are not necessarily just that. Now you can then go one step further. You can say, well, I have a mind, I have thought, I have thinking. And so that's where a lot of people think they are. They think they are the things they think they are, which is a bit of a riddle in itself. But that's like me saying, I assume I'm George Cook, that's my name. I know I'm 21. I know I'm living in England and all these things. However, we've already established that they're just constructs and labels and titles, that we aren't actually them. We are something that has the ability to assume that we're them falsely to a point that's believable. And so what I realise a lot of people have been going through over the last honestly, to be honest with you, from what I can see in literature, from what I can see in the difference in music, from what I can see in the difference in what's socially accepted and spoken about, things have been kind of changing rapidly for about the last 30 or 40 years. And over time, we're just seeing such differences in worldwide culture and worldwide sort of conscious states, and in music, in film, in arts, in media, in all these different things. And what I want people to kind of realise is that if now more than ever it looks like things are getting worse for you, they probably are, chances are they are, because that's why you think so, but they are also getting worse to the point they're going to get a hell of a lot better, because there comes a point where we get sick of suffering and we get fed up of being miserable and we get sick of being the victim to life. And when we get to that point, something magical happens. We empower ourselves. We become more than these ideologies we believe we are. And so we escape our own limitations of what we're told we're capable of who we're told we are, of what we're told we can be. And we start to realise that just because someone told me I should be an accountant, or someone told me I can only make 30 grand a year, or someone told me I shouldn't go to university because I'm not smart enough, isn't inherently true. And just as much as you can believe something that doesn't benefit you to the point you believe it's true, you can believe something that will benefit you to the point you believe it's true. And that's what I think a lot of people are going to be getting to now, and that's on a mass, conscious, worldwide scale. Because look at the way the world is. We are so sick and fed up of being mistreated, of being discriminated, of being governed unfairly by our leaders, and being played with by the media, and being mistreated by our medical industry, that people are finally sick to death of being sick to death. And so I really think we're about to see something amazing happening in the world. Now, it doesn't look like it. It's going to look like everything is getting worse for a while, maybe a few years. Hopefully not that long, but maybe a few years. But in that process, things are going to get a whole lot better. And I do really mean it, because ultimately it all comes down from one instant decision to take responsibility, to stop blaming someone else other than, well, no, not even stop blaming someone else, to stop the blame and to start the responsibility, because they are not the same thing. You cannot do those things together. And in society, we've kind of misassumed what responsibility means. We've assumed that if I'm responsible for something, then I'm to blame. No, that's not true. That's not at all true. If, let's say I was let's say I was really badly mistreated by my parents growing up. I wasn't, but let's say I was, and I was kicked and beaten, and unfortunately, obviously, some people do go through that. I'm not to blame for that when I was a 2-year-old child, of course not. But when I'm 18, when I'm 25, when I'm 30, when I've got my own kids, whose responsibility is it to realise that that's not okay? It's mine. I can't blame my parents and then do the same thing to my kids. That's awful. And a lot of people do that, but that's because they're stuck blaming someone else. So whilst they're blaming someone else, then they can't do anything about it. And so it really does just make one decision. And I mean that, and I mean that well and truly. Now, if you want to actually hear about the story a bit more, I will link the video up in the corner somewhere below. I will link the video up in one of the corners somewhere on the little white labels, because I have spoken about this experience before. Because well and truly, and I'll summarize it quick, when my life was at its worst, when nothing was working for me, when I had nothing, when I really was down in the dumps and hopeless and had no opportunity, no leverage, no leeway, no support, no help, no nothing, I made the decision that I was going to take responsibility for everything. And since then, I've gone from being too paranoid to leave my house, too unwell and sick to keep down even the most tedious of naff jobs in the world, to having no social life, no friends, no real family relationships, to having become a self-made, very young entrepreneur, to having absolute phenomenal physical and mental health, to doing around the country talks, seminars and workshops helping hundreds and thousands of others. I've got social media channels that are anywhere between 1,000 and 160,000 monthly views that are based around helping people live happier and healthier lives. And so look at what I've done, look at my YouTube channel, look at my social media, look at my website, look at my books, look at all the events I've done. All of this has been within that last 2.5 years of making that decision. And don't get me wrong, okay, and of course people have helped me along the way, but all of this has been done off of my own motivation, my own drive, my own inspiration, my own passion. And on top of that, I've got fantastic friendships. I've got a completely rebuilt relationship with my parents and my family. Even now, when we're also torn apart by lockdown and isolation, despite things still going wrong, despite things still being difficult in life, in fact, they're probably arguably more difficult because I choose to face them rather than run from them. But despite that, I am well and truly excited and thrilled and happy with life. Now, don't get me wrong, I still get down in the dumps. I still get annoyed, I still get wound up, I still get frustrated because life can be challenging. But I deal with it better every time. And I've not gone near, I think I had 2 drinks, really small minimal drinks throughout lockdown because I got a bit stressed. And other than that, I've not drunk for 8 months. I've not chased bad behaviours and bad habits for well over a year. I've kept down jobs better than ever. I've made more money than I have than ever. I've made money off my own self. I've done all these things purely because I made the change to become aware of what was wrong with me and to take responsibility of it. And now what I want to do, and what I have been doing and what I will continue to do, is help others to do the same. Because as much as I can't do it for you, and I would love to, and it would probably make the process easier, it's not what it's about. It's about doing things ourselves, becoming self-aware, becoming self-empowered. And to do that, we have to face our darkness, we have to face our shadows, we have to face our own egos. And I believe right now, with how much stress and cruelty and unpleasantness and all this that's going on in the world, more and more people are just going to be getting sick to death of being sick to death, and that's going to cause a shift. That's going to cause a complete change in consciousness. And if that starts to happen, if we can start taking responsibility for ourselves and stop blaming others, then once we sorted ourselves out, once we sorted our health out, once we sorted our mental health out, once we sorted our financial situations out, then we can actually take things to a much more grand level. We can start taking responsibility for the social problems that we refuse to do anything about, that we expect the government to fix. We can start taking responsibility for the flaws in our medical industry that we're expecting the head board members to fix. We can start taking responsibility for the hunger states around the world, rather than waiting for someone else to just go and feed the entirety of Africa or India or whatever. Once we start taking responsibility for ourselves, then we can all start taking responsibility for ourselves. And in doing that, then we're going to see absolutely marvellous, magnificent worldwide changes. And I do truly think we will, and we are, and that we're going to within the coming years. And so I am excited for it. I know a lot of people right now are anything other than excited for life, but it is something to be excited about. And it is something that, although isn't easy to do, it is simple, and it does start with just a simple decision. With all that being said, selves, do your best to get outside if you can, do your best to have some fun, and yeah, just take care of yourselves, take care of your loved ones. Peace, much love, and enjoy the rest of your day.